Our newsmaker today on the segment is Mr. Funso Doherty, the 2023 governorship candidate of the African Democratic Congress. Now, the Lagos Island Model City Plan was revealed to the public for comments last month. Now, this exercise was carried out by Dar Al Handasa, an international consulting firm with headquarters in Lebanon, engaged by the Lagos state government. Now, stakeholders' input was received with a vision of regeneration and evaluation of Lagos Island's vital environment, and also has three main key priority areas. One, to protect mainly from flooding, to restore the informal settlements, and also to enable the island recover and thrive. Mr. Doherty, in a letter to the State Commissioner of Physical Planning and Urban Development, and also copied to the office of the Speaker of the State House of Assembly, raised some vital concerns on the final draft report of the plan. And Mr. Funso Doherty joins us this morning as our newsmaker on Now Breakfast. Good morning, Mr. Doherty. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Now, let us into some more of your thoughts, regarding insight on this plan.
Okay. Thank you, and thank you for the opportunity to talk about this. As you noted, the plan itself was revealed sometime last month exposed for comments. And while, generally it's a good idea to renew the island, it's a historic district, but as we know, the built environment is under various kinds of stresses with formal and informal settlement. So it's generally a good idea. However, we do think that there are a number of issues that need to be considered a little bit deeper. And we also have some issues around the process by which this plan was developed. In the first place, I think the use of an international firm, while okay, I think you have to incorporate people who have an understanding of the cultural environment, the cultural sensitivities. So I'd have thought a team that incorporates that would
work better.
Yeah. Then the process of consultation seemed to emphasize predominantly government organs, right? If you look at who they said they consulted, and you really need a broader consultation for something as groundbreaking and historic as this. So members of the business community, families resident in that area, the private sector, real estate developers. You need a broad range of input. If you also look at the plan itself, it involves quite a lot of reclamation, right, all along the marina. And this is something that we think needs to be considered or explained better, right? The issue of flooding is one that we are well aware of. A number of concerns have been raised around reclamation activity around the lagoon, which, as you know, is part of the natural sort of draining mechanisms of the city. So it's important to understand what the impact of this further work is going to be, as well as a lot of the other reclamation projects that are going on in the lagoon, which many have said maybe are impacting, the flowback mechanism. So for stakeholders, this is important to understand this. I think another important point is that if you look at the premise of the plan, the first set of actions which the plan seeks to undertake essentially does two things. It works on a few of the canals within the city, within the island, and it also has this plan to develop the waterfront all the way from 5 Cowrie Creek all the way around to Ebutero through reclamation out of the lagoon, right? Now, so essentially it's combining two things: flood control and this, what I would call ad hoc development, which is tacked onto the flood control. And that development activity is premised on the fact that will release funding, right, to cover the flood works, right? And combined, these two things will now make up the first phase of the project. And we are saying that you don't need to link those two things. You can delink them, focus on what it takes to do flood control. And then when you're thinking about development, you have to do that in a more fundamental way that says, what should you be developing? How does that development tie into what you are seeking to do, which is to regenerate the built environment? If you link them, you run the risk of essentially the tail wagging the dog, right? Where you're undertaking activity which may be disconnected from the underlying sort of objective. So these are some of the points. We had a couple of other points around the heritage of Lagos Island. We don't think that's been fully or sufficiently considered. Lagos Island, as you know, much of the history of Nigeria and of Lagos is tied into Lagos Island. So the celebration of that heritage through its buildings, through its built environment, must be central actually to a plan like this, rather than being sort of an adjunct to it. Then finally, the process of exposing it, I think, is also, could be better, right? Because this plan is not anywhere online. I think for a wider viewing, things like this should be out in the public domain so that people have an opportunity to see it and understand the thinking behind it.
Now, earlier, sir, you spoke about the government's failure to have their reach being insufficient, if you like. It's not all encompassing, but they did involve the locals via a town hall, to seek their thoughts on the matter as well. Do you still see it as unaddressed so far?
Well, I'm going by what they said in their report. So in their report, they set out the people that they consulted. And so going by that report, it shows that they consulted LSDPC, they consulted the local government councils, they consulted the Oba of Lagos, consulted Oba Renewal Agency of Lagos State. So these are, as you can see, it's predominantly government. And in the conversations, actually, with stakeholders such as real estate developers, architects, many people are not aware, actually, of the plan, right? So I think that objectively, a better job could have been done of consulting.
So, Mr. Doherty, I find it interesting you talk about a better job, because you, even in your letter, you do list out some of the people and the institutions they've consulted, which includes some traditional rulers here in Lagos Island. And
a traditional ruler.
So
yes.
Just the one.
Yes.
It's interesting because a lot of the time when we talk about meeting the average man, the ordinary man, we talk about meeting them through traditional rulers. Do you not think that traditional ruler's input is sufficient enough?
Good question. I actually do not think it's sufficient, particularly for a project like this. Remember that this is a community that is made up of many different groups. So you have people who live there and have lived there for generations. You have traders who come in daily. You have business people. You have, and part of the stakeholders as well in a project like this are the private sector, the developers, the financiers, investors, all of these kinds of people who you require to come up with a comprehensive plan that would work, right? So I think it's not enough to say that you spoke to the Oba of Lagos, right? I think there's no substitute for engaging the actual groups within the community. There's no reason why you shouldn't talk to youth groups, for example. They might have a different perspective. But this is what I'm saying, is that this is a renewal project for a historic area that's a vibrant and living community. And you should take the time to gather all of this information, all of this input, all of these thoughts, and it should form a part of the design process. And this is just one of the views that we have around it.
So perhaps I'll pull you into something that may be political in nature, the question itself, but it is a concern.
Yeah.
You note that similar projects or similar drives in other parts of Lagos have not been treated in the same way that this one is being treated. And you're specific about Lagos Island. This is supposed to be prime land. even though much of Lagos Island does not look like what is described as the more affluent parts of Lagos, when you talk about Ikoyi, you talk about Victoria Island, but it is prime land, culturally, economically, in all the ways.
Yes.
So my question is, are you insinuating that, this is kind of like a leg in, a way that will, down the line, make Lagos Island not accessible? It's no longer the home to the average Lagosian.
So, in a project like this, I wouldn't say that because I don't have evidence that is in fact the case. But in a project like this, that is obviously one of the things that you have to guard against. And when you have a built-up environment like this, with families, communities that have built up over the years of different socioeconomic groups, many of which are underprivileged socioeconomic groups, you have to worry about the potential for gentrification within those neighborhoods from projects like this. So I think that it is important when you think about the waterfront development, for example, what you don't want is a situation where because it is viewed as being a way of funding, that part of the development becomes a development that is disconnected from the community that is supposed to renew, if you see what I mean. The other aspect of it being treated somewhat differently, or appearing to be treated somewhat differently, is this idea of the link that says, in order to do flood control, we need to reclaim land and develop it and give it to private sector developers, etc. We don't think that link is necessarily the case. There's flood protection work going on all over the state. The state is raising money for flood protection works. As recently as a couple of months ago, the state raised 100 billion, 30 billion of which was earmarked for flood control work, which is going on. So we think that link is not necessarily required.
So let's speak about clarity of this, or rather the communication behind projects in the state. You've mentioned it here, but I know that you also essentially put out a letter in the public regarding the Sustainable Transport Initiative, the one that is between Oando and the state government with the electric buses. Mm-hmm. And communication was another key thing that you mentioned there. I noticed that I would say that there aren't as many criticisms of that project, right? But this is a recurrent one.
Yes.
What exactly is the issue? What would you say would you call it a deliberate move, or is the state government simply missing it when it comes to letting people know what's going on?
So I really I can't speak for what the motivations of the state government are. But I would say that generally, where you have projects that are involve both the private and the public sector, and very often we term them PPPs, public-private partnerships, the need for communication, for openness, for transparency is substantially higher. Right, because those are areas where the interests of private individuals or private businesses are conflated with the interests of the public, and it's important for the public. And very often these are arrangements that span over long periods and involve substantial costs, and may involve costs that come from the pocket of the citizens. So there's always a need, and this is a global phenomenon. Whenever you have PPPs, there's a need for greater transparency, and I think this is one of the areas where I think we've seen weakness on the part of government in Lagos, and a lot more could be done. So if you look at that initiative that you spoke about, the first we got to know about it was an announcement by Oando talking about this public-private partnership. Now, through our intervention and the discussions that we've had with government has stepped back from that and said, actually, it's not a PPP. So, but why did it take somebody raising it for government to now step back and say there's no PPP? And then an earlier comment, the governor himself had referred to a partnership. So they are walking back, some of those comments. And what we've said is that, okay, given that there is, some inconsistency between the various comments that are coming out, why don't you just open up the documents, share the provision of the MOU so that we know what is the memorandum of understanding that government has entered into with this private sector entity on our behalf. If, as you say, it is a harmless thing where we're just working together to sort of explore this space and nobody has created any commitments, then there should be no problem with letting us know what the terms associated with those things are. And for PPPs, I don't think this is a lot to ask.
A newsmaker still this morning is Mr. Funso Doherty, the 2023 governorship candidate of the African Democratic Congress, and he did give his thoughts regarding the regeneration and evolution of Lagos Island's vital environment planned by the state government. Now, much has been said about the cultural sensibilities of the residents of the state, with the generality, if you like, of these plans undertaken by the government. Where is the place for all of that as far as this particular issue is concerned?
So this is very important, actually, because what I think some people forget is that we think of the island and we think about the big office buildings on the marina and so on and so forth, and those are there. But there are people who that's their local community. They wake up there, they go to school there, they live there. When the traders come and go, when the office workers come and go in the evening, they are there, right? So, and their families have been there for generations. So it's important to take those on board and actually give them a place of prominence. So when we talk about incorporating cultural sensibilities, one of the recommendations that we have made, for example, is that for a project like this, you should actually have like a steering group, right? Which is part of the governance structure of it, which is made up of key stakeholders, right? And that steering group then becomes that ensures that all of these voices are incorporated and ensures that the project plans, the way it's been implemented, the environmental impact on the community, all are in line with what is envisioned and what has been promised. And that keeps it on track and doesn't allow it to get derailed.
You are doing this from the opposition, from the other end of the aisle, which is interesting because the main opposition would be the PDP, right? At least that is how it has been for a while. And in Nigeria, opposition tends to be solely from the political perspective and not so much from what you are doing, which is matching the government step for step in some of the projects that they've been undertaking. So I want to first start with the steam, the energy with which you have entered into this. Do you think that you will be able to sustain this over the course of 4 years? And are we looking simply at the current projects of the government, or will you be looking at the past projects? Because this is still, it's the same administration as the second term.
Yeah, so, I mean, look, the reality of it is that for those of us who feel that governance in Lagos could be substantially improved, for different reasons, which we've articulated, I think it's important that we continue to find ways in which we can help make that happen, right? And obviously part of that is to run for office, which I did, and part of it is also to continue to speak out on issues of significance, where you believe you can add value, or you can, or where you believe things could be better, or where you think things are going down the wrong path. Because I think the society benefits from it, and I think it's important to have that voice, and that is why I do what I do. Now, obviously, I don't speak on every single issue. So when issues are of significance and I think that, I have something to say about a particular issue, I will say it so that the people have a sense of, what one thinks about it, and people can form their own views and opinions around it. But it's important that that voice is out there, because that also keeps government on their toes and ensures that there's accountability and which is what we all want, really.
You don't strike me as a vindictive man, right? And that's why it would be interesting to know if the government were to extend a hand of, let's use the word partnership. Yes, fellowship. Perhaps that fits better, because we're seeing that conversation at the national level presently. As much as, we've not had a cabinet announced yet, no nominee list.
Sure.
But if any state were to replicate, Lagos is the most likely to do so, right? For many reasons.
Yes.
Would you be interested? Would you consider being a part of this government? Do you think that you'd be able to hold it better accountable from within its ranks?
Yeah, so it's a good question. And I think the short answer is no. I think there are reasons of, the fundamental reasons of principle why I don't think I can serve in this government. But it does not mean that I cannot offer my voice on behalf of the people of Lagos. I'm a Lagosian myself, so I benefit from the accountability of government and improved governance. And I think it's also important that there should be a voice on the outside, right? So I think that you cannot necessarily be within a ship and be criticizing that ship. It just does not work. I mean, so.
Very interesting, that last point. At the risk of being in there and being touted as one who is a fifth columnist. All right, we hear you, sir. And that's pretty much our time on this segment this morning. Mr. Funso Doherty, the 2023 governorship candidate of the African Democratic Congress, has joined us this morning. Many thanks, sir, for being a part of the program.
Thank you for having me again.